Yeah, so my first open-ended question is, what do we need the CV to do? So when you're thinking about user experience, this is where you need to start. Like, what does my site need to do? What does my app need to do? Let's count that as rhetorical, shall we? It needs to get us an interview. That is its singular purpose. That is all a CV exists to do. Everything else is extraneous. So when I'm thinking about CVs, this is my touchstone. Does it get us an interview? Now, the thing with CVs is that there is no objective one true way of writing them. If you take your CV to 5 different people that write a lot of CVs, you'll get 5 different sets of advice. So that's why I talk about my philosophy of CV writing. I'm not just going to give you my tips. I'm going to explain why I give them to you. If someone else has conflicting ideas, awesome. Ask them why they think those ideas work. And an aspect of user experience we can use is A/B test them. A/B testing is where you have a new feature on your website or app and you just roll it out to half of your users or a portion of your users, and then see how they compare to the people still using the original version. So if you've got an idea to make an app, to make a CV that is like huge splashes of color and graphics everywhere and it looks really eye-popping, like awesome, send it out, see whether it gets you interviews. At the same time, maybe you want a really boring conventional one that's just text, send that out, see which one gets you more interviews. Like if you want to make a CV that looks like a Pokemon card, or it's like a .exe that they have to run, like those are brave ideas and some employers might respond to them. So it might be worth doing it, but I'd say A/B test it, try it versus a more boring conventional one as well. So when we talk about user experience, we need to know who is the user. So for a CV, who is the user? Totally happy for this to be a rhetorical question as well. The user is not you. You are not the user of your own CV. The user is the employer. This is something it's really easy to lose sight of. Yeah, the hiring manager, whoever is the person in charge, is the user. Yeah, writing a CV is a super personal thing. You are trying to put down the facts of your life, but you aren't actually the center of attention when you're thinking about it. The center of attention should be the employer, the prospective employer. So what is that person like? In user experience, we have the concept of user stories, where we make these hypothetical people that will be using our app or using our website, and we say, as a type of person, I want to do this thing so that I can accomplish my goal. So as a user of public transport, I want to be able to figure out the best route to take to my destination so that my travel is easy. If we were going to put together a user story for our hypothetical hiring manager, what are they going to be like? This one I'm not going to make this rhetorical. If you want to like jot a couple of words to describe this hypothetical person into the chat, go ahead. What is the person that has to read CVs like? Yeah, busy. Busy is a good word. What else are they like? How do they feel? They have targets and deadlines. They could well be a manager. They are under pressure. Oh, they're analytical. That would be nice. They could be HR. What's their emotional state? Knows a little about what they want to have the skills to look for quickly. Critical. Distracted. I like it. Overwhelmed. Yes, under pressure. So this is the kind of direction that I tend to go in when I think about my hypothetical user. So as a hiring manager, I want to not be tired, rushed, and sick of seeing CVs. Like, this is how I imagine the person that's going to read my application. They've got other things to do. They're under pressure. They've got deadlines. They don't really want to be spending time on CVs. They want to be able to get back to the other parts of my job. And so it depends on who you're applying to. If you're sending a CV to like a small startup, then it's probably the founders that are looking at your CV, right? If they've grown a little bit, software engineer, like you need to hire someone for your team, have a look through this stack. Maybe they've got someone that fulfills an admin function, and it's like, I know that you're busy doing our finances, but here you're in charge of hiring now as well. For a much larger company, they might have a dedicated HR function. So my very first jobs were admin assistants in HR departments. And let me tell you, HR people don't like looking at CVs either. Like, nobody enjoys this part of the job. So this is what I'm imagining when I'm creating a CV. The person receiving it isn't into it at all. They're bored, distracted. They've got other things they'd rather be doing. So that informs us when we come to our design brief. What are we thinking of when we're putting our CV together? And so given that our user is distracted and busy, we want to give them the information that is relevant to them as painlessly as possible. And this is a user experience principle as well. You want your users to have the minimal cognitive load to get to the functions they need. Like, they shouldn't have to go digging around through cryptically labeled menus to find the settings they need. Like, it should be obvious to them that I want to do X. Oh, look, here is function X. So what information is relevant to the employer? How do we determine what counts as relevant? So some stuff is going to be obvious. I'll give you a chance to type a reply here. What counts as relevant information to the prospective hiring manager? Previous experience, relevant experience if you have it. Yeah, your skills, your education, your work experience, your projects, contact details. That is an important one. Do not send out CVs that have a typo in your email, because they don't work at all. You do not get interviews from those. Yeah, pre-corona, they'd be interested in your location or your time zone. A/B test the typo. Nice. Values for culture fit analysis. Nice. Cool. Is there anything else we can tell them in the CV that is going to make you stand out compared to the other people sending in CVs? Whether you do other things apart from work, yeah. Your achievements. Your name, yeah. Short profile, summarize CV contents, yeah. Side passion projects, or side projects, passion products. Yeah, okay, cool. So there's one other thing, soft skills, good call. Right, so we want to show them that we have the skills that they need. So that could well be by pointing to previous experience, where we say, hey, look, I've done a job that's basically identical. It could be, if we don't have that experience, we might point to other stuff we've done to say, hey, I've still got those skills. So yeah, your side projects, your passion projects might well be a better illustration of your skills than your previous job. Like, if you're changing career, you won't necessarily point to your last job for the technical side of the skills, but you might point to it to say, hey, look, I've got people skills, I can work in a team. Like, if you've done like retail or hospitality experience, that gives you the kind of social skills and teamwork skills that somebody fresh off a computer science degree won't necessarily have. Like, you can prove that you've got real world people skills. Now, the trick here is we're talking about the skills they need. So how do we determine which skills they need? We all have a constellation of skills. If we just emphasize all of them equally, we're not necessarily targeting their specific needs. And they are tired and bored. They don't necessarily want to read through a list of every single skill we've got. The way that we do this, we look at the job description. So yeah, read the job description, fantastic. So quite often job adverts are set out like job descriptions nowadays. They will say, here are the requirements that we want you to have. And they'll often, here are the essential criteria you need to. Sometimes you might want to contact the employer directly and say, hey, is there an expanded job description for this role? Cool. So I saw a question, how do you evaluate whether to put projects on a CV versus a link on a portfolio? I'll get to that in a second. But yeah, the job description will have a list of what they're looking for. What you need to bear in mind is that the job description is a wish list. The perfect candidate that descends from the sky in a beam of light will tick every single box, but they know that that isn't likely. They are just looking to see that you hit a bunch of the requirements. And even the list where it says essential, you don't have to tick every single one of them. And to show that applying for jobs, depending on how many boxes you ticked, there's a strong cultural and gender aspect. Men will go, oh, I tick about half of them and apply, whereas like non-male identifying, like non-men identifying, will be much more hesitant and will want to tick many more boxes. So what I encourage you to do is try and have the unearned confidence of a mediocre white guy like myself. Like, if you tick about half the boxes, it's worth sending an application in. And again, think of it as A/B testing. Like, you can apply for half the jobs where you're like, I tick almost every box. Apply for another half, like as many jobs again, where you only tick half of them, and see whether you get interviews, because that's your criteria for success. So I saw a question, how do you know what the requirements is an actual requirement versus a nice to have? So sometimes they're explicit about it and we'll separate them out. Other times it's less obvious. Potentially you can look at their website, look at their blog to try and gauge what they think is important. Like, look at the sort of posts they put out, look at any information you can find about their team. If you can do some LinkedIn stalking, you might be able to drum up a conversation with someone at the company to like find out a little bit about their culture. In general though, like I said, the hiring people have this list and they know that almost certainly nobody is going to tick every single box, and they can be flexible. Like, as long as you tick about half, you can potentially persuade them that they should still give you a shot. Like, especially with boxes that you don't tick, you could potentially point to skills you've got that are very similar, or point to incidents where you've learned a similar skill quickly. So you can assure them, I don't tick this box, but I know it's important to you, and here's the reason why I think I will be able to tick it with a little bit of support and training from you. Now, the one thing that our design brief includes that didn't come up when I asked what information is relevant to the employer is to show them that we actually want the job. And this is an aspect of job searching that almost always goes overlooked. Possibly there's a British cultural element in it, where British culture, you're not meant to blow your own trumpet and you're not meant to seem too eager. Like, people find it embarrassing to say, I actually want this job, I want to work with you. But if your CV specifically says to them, I want to work for you, that is going to make you stand out, because almost everybody else doesn't do that. I like to include the name of the company in the very first paragraph of my CV. So I like to say, like, hello, I am an X with this experience, and I would jump at the chance to join your team, company Y. Like, if you mention them, the hiring manager can straight away see, oh, wow, this CV has been written for us. It's not a form CV that you've bashed out to 10 different places. This was written for me. Obviously, don't send a CV with somebody else's company name in it. You can A/B test that if you like, but I'm pretty sure that it won't go down well. So here are the practical steps that I encourage you to take with your CV. And step one is declutter. If you are applying to a tech company, the odds are they will be looking at your CV on a screen. They are not, I'm going to just take a guess, the kind of place that will print out your CV and just go through a stack of papers. So what that means is we can open up the margins. You don't need lots of white space around your content. You don't need a huge header and footer. You can use all the space on a page. Just like you wouldn't make an app where all the content is like at the top of the screen and then you've just got a great big blank space at the bottom. Spread it out so that it's easy. Remove unnecessary labels. You want to strip away content that doesn't add anything to the CV. So you don't need to have a label saying telephone number and then your telephone number, because it's a telephone number. They can tell what it is. You don't need to label it. You don't need to write CV at the top of a CV. They can tell that it's a CV. Yeah, like quite often it's very clear from, no need to label it. You can also strip out any information that isn't legally necessary for them to have. You don't need to mention any of the protected characteristics on your CV unless you want to. Like, if there's a reason why you think bringing something up will be in, like if you were going for a job with a company with a particularly strong agenda in some area. So if they were like, I don't know, catering kosher meals, then you might want to bring up that you're from the Jewish background and have a knowledge of that sort of thing. But in most cases, you wouldn't want to bring up an unnecessary protected characteristic. You don't need to put your date of birth. You don't need to put any information about yourself that you don't need to. And then maybe the toughest part of decluttering, remove unnecessary content. And this is really hard because in my eyes, everything I've ever done has been necessary, and all of my job experience and all of my outside experience has been, yeah, it's all been part of my life. So why wouldn't I include it? But we need to remember that the user of our CV is the hiring manager, and not everything is going to be relevant to them. So you need to be ruthless at trimming out content that you don't need. Oh, my, okay. Okay, well, okay. Okay, I'm stopping video, and hopefully that makes my audio more solid. Yeah, okay, sure. You don't get to see my flailing hands now. but that's fine. Okay, so removing unnecessary content. It might mean or not referring to specific projects, but also it can. Oh yeah. It also just means stripping out language. For the bulk of a CV, I don't think you should write in full sentences. I'm a huge fan of bullet points. Like, so have a bullet point that starts with a verb. So you don't need to write, in this job, I had the following responsibilities. All of that text is redundant because it's a CV. They know you're going to be writing about responsibilities in a job. You don't need to write, every month I had the task of, every month I have the task of compiling a report to a tight deadline. You can just write monthly reporting to deadlines. So you can shorten your language and make it very scan readable. Again, we're thinking of this user that is tired and distracted, and we want them to just be able to like scan with bullet points, get the gist of what you were doing, and not have to spend too much time on it. So yeah, the way that you can decide what is necessary is, again, look at the job description and try and be ruthless by looking at it through the employer's eyes and stripping out content that they don't need. Now, what you might want to do is have a master CV where you put everything you've ever done into it. You list every single job, every single voluntary thing you've done, every community thing you've done, and in each job, you list every single duty. And so this Uber CV might be like 6 or 7 pages long. And then when you come to apply to a job, you start with that, and then you just start ruthlessly deleting and whittle it down just to the content that's relevant for that particular job. So yeah, that can help. And a good thing to do is get somebody else to help you remove content, because other people can be much more objective when taking an axe to your CV than you can. Like, I might struggle to be able to remove a paragraph from my CV, but if I pass it to someone else, they'll just go, this job here that you loved is not relevant to this particular employer, so let's use it. So the next thing I want to talk about on your CV is the visual hierarchy. So when you're designing a web page, like I imagine we're all into our fundamental page, right? You have the one single H1 that is the most important title on the page. And then your H2s you use sparingly to break up the content. We want to apply the same principles in our CV. So we want the important sections to come first. So there is no particular order that you have to give the CV in. I usually like to start with a professional profile, a paragraph of text, and that will be about the only paragraph that I use, where I just say, hello, this is who I am. This is why I love your company more than all the other companies. And here are some other relevant details. After that, I'll often have a key competencies section, and that will just be 2 or 3 of the most important things, whatever they are. So for some jobs, I might have just my academic stuff appear there. For another job, I might point out specific experience I've done or specific voluntary experience I've done. But yeah, the key competency section is an area that I can tailor to that specific job, and it just highlights content that otherwise might be hidden on page 2. So I see someone's asked, would the professional profile be a mini version of what goes in a cover letter? Yeah, absolutely. When I write cover letters, you kind of play the same game. So you're still trying to get the hiring manager to see information that ticks the boxes as easily as possible. Some hiring people hate CVs, and if there's a letter, they'll skip the CV and jump straight to the letter. Other managers will ignore the letter completely and just go to the CV. So not knowing what kind of person they are, you want to include your biggest selling points in both places. So no matter where they look, their first impression is, oh, this person ticks boxes. I don't think I've said that explicitly yet, but recruitment is a tick box exercise. The list of requirements on the job advert, on the job description, is literally a list of boxes to be ticked to get through to the next stage of recruitment. So by looking at the job description, you can get an idea of the boxes that need to be ticked, and you can try and persuade them in your opening paragraph and in your key competency section, I tick a bunch of these boxes. I like to imagine that hiring managers probably wait until they've got a bunch of CVs to go through in one go. And what they'll probably do is spend literally 30 seconds on each one, looking to see if they can just throw it away. So they'll look at each CV very briefly and try and go, no, 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 or maybe. And the maybes they'll put to one side, and after they've culled as many CVs as they can, they'll pick up the maybes, and those ones they'll actually read all the way through. So you want the top of your CV to have the most important sections first. So if you've just left education, or if you've just redone your education, like if you've gone on a boot camp, or if you've worked for a bit and you've gone back into education, you might want your education section above your job history section into two parts, like relevant experience that comes first, and you list anything that's even vaguely techie. And then you'd have an other job experience where you list roles that are less relevant with much less detail. In your job history, I also like to mix paid work and voluntary work interchangeably. Like if you do tech community stuff, list it as a job. If you do volunteer stuff, list it as a job, because to the employer, it's not important really whether you were paid to do something or not. What's important is that you did the thing, you gained the experience, you developed your skills. Whether there was a paycheck or not so important. So another visual hierarchy point, ensure the section headings don't catch the eye above all else. Now, the reason that I say this is because it is a CV. The context has been established. The employer knows that they are looking at a document that will have a specific type of information grouped up ready for them. So if you are doing a website or an app that is brand new to people and is using concepts that they don't really understand, you might want really big headings to draw the eye and say, this section does this section does this. But if your app is something like a to-do list where the concept is very familiar to everybody, you don't need a massive heading saying to-do list. Like, they'll understand what it is by looking at it. So I generally like to make my section headings smaller than some of the other text on my page, and I'll just have a horizontal line to show the person this is a new section. And if you need to know what section it is and you can't figure it out at a glance, then you can look at this little text over on the side, which will tell you. I also like to be sparing with formatting details. So I won't use any italics or underlining almost at all. And I'll use as little bold as I can, because what I want is for the bold text to jump out at them. If there's too much bold on the page, it's overwhelming and the eye doesn't get drawn to any one particular place. If you use it sparingly, then it will be easier for their eye to get drawn to specific things. I also like to make a point of putting job titles or qualification titles at the start of a line. And that is due to the way our brain has been wired to approach written material. So I don't know whether you've ever seen heat maps of attention. They look like this. So people that were brought up in a culture that reads left to right, their eyes have been trained to jump to certain points on a page. So these heat maps are tracking somebody's attention in the first second or two, or maybe even shorter period of time that they look at a page. And their eye will naturally jump up to the top left-hand corner and then scan down the left-hand side of the page. So if the left-hand side of your page has visually distinct job titles, it just says, senior engineer, junior engineer, trainee software developer. In a blink of a second, they have just understood your whole career to date, like without even really understanding it. You're sort of subliminally feeding them the story of your career. So yeah, you want to put the most important information at the start of a line. And if you make it visually distinct, it will catch the eye at a reflexive level. They won't even be aware that they've ingested your CV, but that then works in your favor because they'll have a rough idea of what you've done. Your paragraph will tell them more. And then the rest of your CV is just confirming what they already know. Okay, the last thing we want to do is optimize for the specific role that we're applying to. Most of what I'm talking about today is picking a specific role with a specific company and writing a CV for that role. I'm not a fan of having a general CV that you just bash out to a bunch of people because I think that doesn't work nearly as effectively. You might want to come up with a generalized CV. So if you're going to have one on your website available to download, or if you're going to submit it to an agency website, you might need to have a role. Might need to have a CV that isn't optimized for a specific role. In that case, what I'd recommend you do is get 5 or 10 job adverts for the type of role you want and look for the commonalities, look for the things they all ask for and sort of optimize for that. But yeah, when you are applying for a specific role at a specific company, you can be more thorough with your optimizations. So some tips I would recommend: change your job titles to match their job titles where possible. Like don't tell them that you've been a job that you've never even remotely done. But yeah, if they call the role junior web developer and your previous company called it front-end engineer or front-end engineer trainee, then just change it to be, I was a junior developer there. Job titles don't really mean anything, right? Every company defines them in a slightly different way. Language can be used interchangeably or not, like they might have special significance. So if they call it a software engineer, you call yourself a software engineer. If they call it code jockey, you can call it code jockey. Like you're telling them, I have looked at your company, I have looked at your culture, and I have done the things that you are looking for. On a related note, yeah, brand yourself as what they're looking for. So if they've called it full stack web developer, if I can plausibly call myself that, my very first line will be, I am an experienced full stack web developer. Like use the exact terminology they're using, because again, it sets the expectation in the manager's brain. This person is that thing that I am looking for. And then the rest of your CV will hopefully confirm that impression. If you're looking to change career slightly, you can still bring up the job title quickly. So maybe you want to move into DevOps. So you can say, I'm a full stack web engineer with a passion for DevOps, looking for my first role in that field. Like, again, tell them, I know what you're looking for and it is me. Then you can start doing optimizations, like just shuffling your bullet points around. Like, the way that they lay out the job description will tell you what they think is important. Some companies might prioritize working within time limits and budget limits as being the most important thing. They're a very serious enterprise-y type place, in which case make sure any talk of you working within limits and deadlines is prominently displayed. Other places, it's much more about, like, we're a collaborative, friendly company that's all about the teamwork, in which case you can make sure those bullet points come earlier in each job description so that they can see, yeah, you have looked at what we think is important and you have shown us that that is prioritized first. Well, there's a question in chat. Would you say previous job title is something worth bolding, making more obvious in that first line? Yeah, totally could be. Especially if the previous job title is the same or very similar to what you're applying for. It really doesn't hurt to, like, bash them over the head with the, this is the thing that you want and it is me. So, yeah, have a look at mirroring their language. So if they talk about working under time constraints, but your CV says working to deadlines, just switch that language to working under time constraints. Like, I'm not saying copy and paste whole bullet points from the job description, because that looks a bit transparent, but it's terminology and jargon, right? If they have a specific way of saying something and it's essentially the same as something you've done, use their term for it, because that cuts down on the hiring manager's cognitive load. They don't have to try and translate between your old job's jargon and your new job's jargon. They can just see, oh, that person has done the thing that we are looking for. Right, okay. We're gonna move on. I'm gonna show you some examples of my CVs. Cool. You can see my cursor on screen, right? So this is my CV that was submitted in 2010, maybe? Yeah, 2010. So yeah, it's got curriculum vitae at the top in big letters. That is very important content that they definitely needed to have pointed out to them. The most prominent eye-catching text on the page is a list of labels for stuff that they can absolutely figure out on their own. Please don't steal my identity based on any of the information you see here. The most eye-catching text on the page is the labels. And then this is like a giant confusing block of bold. You basically have to read the whole thing to figure out what's going on. At least I used bullet points, so not a complete loss. And then, yeah, like a big confusing mess. Like the dates are at the start of the line. That's not important, right? Like they might need the dates eventually, but they don't need to grab their attention. And then massive headers, huge margins, like not a great CV. It was good enough to get me a job teaching CVs, but fine. Oh, and then also I did this weird talk about yourself in the third person verbal gymnastics. Like, why did I do that? I guess I thought I needed to. But yeah, you can talk about yourself in the first person. It's fine. It sounds much more natural than like Matthew Rose is a versatile and intelligent individual. So after having worked there for 6 years, I then went and did a development bootcamp. And this is the CV that I used after having done that development bootcamp to get my first developer job. So we've got a much more streamlined upper section. Like, they don't need my full address. Like, if they want it, they'll ask me for it. I don't need to tell them this is my email address. It's my email address. I'm quite a fan of having and follow, but what I would probably do is, just in case, have enough of the link that they could enter it manually if they wanted to. But you definitely don't need to include https:// like that's just taking up space for no reason at all. My professional profile, straight away, I am a freshly qualified junior developer. Like, at that point, I was a boot camp grad, but fine, we'll call it a junior developer. And here I talk basically about what I did in the boot camp with only a passing reference to my previous career. My key competency section, it's all boot camp. I don't mention anything I did in my previous life at all, because a tech company is only going to be interested in my boot camp skills. They're not really going to care too much about what I did previously. Without having all that much experience, I make a big thing about the projects that I did during the boot camp. So these are hot links to the repositories. There's an actual viewable version on Heroku that they can go and look at, so they can actually get a little bit more information about what I did. And then everything else I did in my life gets booted to the second page because it's not all that relevant to a tech company. And so here, Open Code is a meetup that I used to run in Birmingham when the world worked and we could do stuff. This was a once a week voluntary thing, but from a tech point of view, it's my most important asset. So I've put that first. So Ingeus is the company where I learned to write CVs. I did about 4 or 5 different job titles while I was there, but I've just picked one of them. Like, while I was a group facilitator, I taught people that had never used IT before how to use IT. And so from a tech point of view, that was the most relevant thing I could pull out. So I talk about that. And then fine, I did some other stuff just to pad it out. And then I did some English teaching. And then, yeah, here, I was a database super user. I was for like about 6 months out of the total. I've combined 2 different jobs here because they were based. And again, I've pulled out like reporting, data entry, data cleansing. Like, that was a tiny part of the job, but it was the most relevant one. So I'll bring it to the top. Education-wise, I make sure that those are bold and at the start of the line so that they jump out. And then, yeah, personal interests. I am a fan of including a hobby section or a personal interests section. If the rest of your CV is doing its job, it portrays you as a perfect robot designed for their job. So your personal interest is an area where you can humanize yourself. What is my best karaoke song? It's I mean, Motorhead's Ace of Spades is my go-to, I think, but there are a bunch that I really like. Do you use Smule? I do not. I do not know what that is. I will look it up afterwards. So yeah, this CV was enough to get me my first developer job. And then after leaving that job, these are 2 CVs that I did afterwards. So we're back down to just 1 page. Now that I've got some experience in tech, I don't need to spend all that time talking about the boot camp. So this is, I think this is the CV. Oh, this is the CV that I submitted to NPM. I applied to NPM and GitHub at the same time. And so here I call myself an experienced support specialist with a background in web development and education. So all of my previous experience just gets distilled down into those words. But I'm a support specialist, which is the thing they were looking for. My key competencies are all about providing support in writing and a little bit of developer knowledge and community empathy. And then my employment history, again, I've put my voluntary stuff first because it seems more relevant. The community IT, like tech stuff, seems more relevant. Then my actual job, I was a web developer, right? But I've also said I was, and that's more relevant to the support role. Back at Intius, I was an IT skills and employability trainer, changed my job titles there. Like I did do those things, but I've made it more apparent to them. Had to cut my personal interests down a bit. At the same time, I was also applying for some technical writing roles. So I hadn't done, well, I've put technical author freelance, like I hadn't done that much. But yeah, I'm an experienced developer and educator. My key competencies are all about writing those docs. And again, like kept it as a technical writer. Yeah, so you can put your jobs in whatever order makes the most sense to you. So you might want to break employment history into two sections where you have your relevant jobs first on the CV and then other jobs. If you were out of work for a while, you might want to, instead of writing dates, you might want to put durations. So just say this job, 2 years. And if they care when those 2 years were, they'll ask you. Oh, one thing I do as well, I never mention months. If you just mention years, then it like let them think those were whole years, right? If you did a job that started in December and finished in January, put 2020, 2021, and like don't lie about it if they ask you. But if they care about the specific dates, they will get you to fill in an exhaustive application form where they ask for the exact dates of everything you've ever done. If they don't care that much about the dates, just put the years and let them assume